Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. I'm Gary Polland, and this week's co-host is Sonny Messiah-Jiles. Sonny, welcome back.
Thank you.
You're always a pleasure.
Oh, thank you.
You add a lot to the show.
Well,
I don't care what other people say. Our guests this week are Keir Murray. Keir is a Democratic political consultant and longtime friend of the show. And joining him is our favorite political science professor, Mark Jones from Rice University and the Baker Institute.
Thank you.
Both really good observers of what's going on. So this week's topic is the Texas Legislature. We're in mid-session. Doesn't seem like much has passed, but that's kind of how it normally looks. So, Mark, what's your take as to where we're at in the session?
I think we're making progress. This is definitely a different legislature than we saw in 2017. 2017, we had Dan Patrick running the Senate like a general, and pretty much all of the Republican senators falling in line, pushing legislation through, only to see it die mostly in the House where Joe Strauss blocked it. This time around, we have a somewhat chastened Dan Patrick, if Dan Patrick can be chastened, after his somewhat subpar electoral performance in 2018. And we have a true speaker with real legitimacy, Dennis Bonnen, who was elected by all of his Republican colleagues and is seen as a strong conservative, but also a pragmatic. And he's focusing far more on bread and butter issues than we saw in 2017. So no bathroom bills, for instance.
Yeah, not this time. Keir, big issue for our good friend Senator Betancourt is property tax reform. And it's a very hotly contested issue. There's a lot of concern in the state that our property taxes are going up way too fast. And so Senator Betancourt and the governor and lieutenant governor and others have crafted this bill that puts a 2.5% cap on increases and sets up an automatic recall election on the taxes if they exceed that. I know it sounds a little convoluted, but it controls the rate of increase. What do you think the prospects for that are, and where does that leave us in terms of sufficient revenue for the state to run?
Well, I think the fact that that bill sailed out of committee weeks ago but is yet to find its way to the floor tells you a lot about its prospects. He doesn't have the votes to get it passed in its current form. My own sense is that 2.5%, if you're going to pass any kind of limit, is way too low. And I think some folks have said that something more in the 7 to 8% range would be more realistic.
No, I think 8% is what we have now.
Yeah,
well
6, 7%.
Yeah.
Well, we have 8% outside of school districts. It's incumbent on the citizens to go out there and get signatures and get on the ballot, which is next to impossible. So 8% would be an improvement for property
with an
tax
automatic
reform.
rollback.
Yeah, with an automatic rollback.
Right, and so I think it remains to be seen what will ultimately happen with that. But if you're throwing that property tax reform in with ostensibly adding money to public schools and doing a teacher pay raise, which has been, for example, Lieutenant Governor Patrick's big priority, it's tough to see where the money comes from. Yes, we have $12–13 billion in the state's rainy day fund, but that's a limited source of potential money, and unless you're looking at raising fees or taxes in some other way, sales tax has been offered as a possibility, but Texas has already one of the highest sales taxes in the country, and that's a rather regressive way of going about collecting more money.
So you're calling for an income tax?
I didn't say any such thing.
I know you weren't going to step there. Look, property taxes are tied to the funding of education. And when this is a two-part question for both of you. Now, Patrick, some people think, what is motivating Patrick to do this $5,000 pay raise for teachers when last session he was totally on the opposite side with vouchers and everything? The flip to that, though, is when you look at the House Speaker making a statement. I don't want to misquote him. I don't know how you call a $5,000 across the board pay raise with no discussion on reducing recapture, no discussion on reducing property tax, no discussion on early childhood education, and no discussion on incentivizing teachers who teach in tough areas. This is not school finance plan. Okay, we got two different sides. Where are we going to land?
Well, I mean, I think Lieutenant Governor Patrick has the gimmick. It sounds great. It's easy to sell. 5,000 pay raise for all teachers. So that allows you to go out and campaign on an issue and show that you've done something. Bonnen is more the policy wonk approach. He's trying to really reform K-12 education and deal with the nitty-gritty, but that's tougher to put into a soundbite. So I think they are going to hit loggerheads at some point. I suspect the Bonnen side is going to win, but it's going to be tough because there's going to have to be some sort of raise for teachers because that's a pretty sexy selling point. And even though the policy wonk would want to say, focus the money and leave it more expendable for other sources, the politician is probably going to say, that's a pretty good point, but it has to be accompanied by other reforms. You can't just do that 5,000 and then go home.
Right. My sense is the Speaker has called for more discretion among local districts to make those judgments about the size of raises for teachers on an individual basis. And the House budget, which I believe is being debated today as we speak, calls for about $9 billion in new money for public schools, but that $9 billion is tied to school finance reform, meaning they've got to take a look at adjusting these formulas, which is no small feat. And so, yeah, there's, I think, an impetus to get more money in the system, but the devil's in the details. It's tougher to get this stuff done, or it would have been done a long time ago.
I was going to mention something. About a decade ago, a Democratic candidate for governor in Louisiana came up with a new idea to raise revenue, most of which would be stuck on out-of-staters. It was a refined oil products fee. I don't know if you remember reading about that. He never got elected governor, but it was going to raise for Louisiana at that point about $2 billion a year, which is significant money, and 80% of the money was going to be paid for by out-of-state taxpayers because of the propensity of Louisiana, in this case Texas too, of having refineries and the impact it has on the state. And I always wondered why that idea never went anywhere, because it would seem like a pretty popular way to raise revenue and not impact the citizens of the state to that extent. Is that the kind of the new ideas, Mark, we need to start looking at, of other ideas to bring in revenue that won't necessarily adversely impact the citizens?
Well, I suspect the big oil companies with refineries would be very much against that.
Everybody
And
pays.
we know the
No,
lobbyists.
no.
We know the lobbyists rule the roost in Austin, and it's very easy for lobbyists to block legislation they don't like, and especially one where I think we would see every refiner across the board, from the very small ones to the very log ones. We could see ExxonMobil being in agreement with Nicolas Maduro and the Chavista dictatorship at Citgo that they don't want to see that tax. So. It's a nice idea, but I don't see it probably happening.
So where we're faced, and back to property taxes, Texas property taxes are up 51.6% on average between 2006 and 2016, that being where the data was calculated, which is 12.9% above population and inflation, and is up 10% more than what California's property taxes went up during that time. Now they have a little different system than we do.
2% a year. I don't think they can go up any more than
Yeah,
that.
but when you sell the house or buy a new house, you get a new number. That's how that changes, and they have full disclosure in California. So do we really need to take a step back when we talk about property taxes and talk about our tax system, that we need to really study the tax system? This is a tax system that's been basically for an agrarian society 100 years ago, and now we're pretty much an urban state. Is there a new way to look at how we raise revenue that would maximize the economy and the ability for jobs and jobs growth, but also make sure the government doesn't get starved and has the money necessary to do its job?
Are you calling for an income
Yeah,
I was just getting ready to say.
Sounds like it.
I was talking about
that
a
elephant
study.
over there is
Income tax.
income tax.
Yeah,
When
really.
we look at the policy options, we already have one of the highest sales tax. Our property taxes are among the highest. So either you really start soaking business or you're going to an income tax. Now, there's some things you can do at the margins. So our tax law has huge loopholes for large corporations that don't pay their fair share in property taxes. Pretty much no big company that owns a refinery, a manufacturing plant, a shopping mall, they're not paying anywhere close to their fair share in property taxes, which means individual residents are paying much more. We could close a lot of those loopholes, have more disclosure on sales, and also provide more teeth to essentially keep those people from using the legal system and the loopholes from not paying. Now that wouldn't cover everything, but it would be a good start.
And I was just going to add to that. I mean, I think you have this double whammy in suburban Texas, where a lot of the growth in property taxes has occurred as home valuations have gone up, but we've also seen massive increases in student enrollment in their schools, and their school districts are just at the financial breaking point. Through Robin Hood, they're sending tens of millions of dollars back to Austin while they're unable to meet their own local needs. School districts like Cy-Fair or Spring Branch in the Houston area, it's unsustainable for these places. We've got to do something.
I think most people agree with that. A few years ago, Talmadge Heflin, former state rep,
Budget chair.
right, came up with a tax plan. He wanted to take the sales tax and expand it.
Right.
Basically, no exemptions, no deductions. Everybody, and you pay on everything. And then if you feel bad for people that are below the poverty line, you can give them a rebate. That was what he talked about, and he said with that you could significantly lower the property taxes. Is that an idea that could fly?
Oh, I was looking at that for a survey I'm doing with Dick Murray with people at the Hobby School, and we were looking at those options. And if you added sales tax to pharmaceuticals or particularly in non-prescription,
How about lawyers?
or groceries and certainly services,
Yeah.
you could. It adds money, but it doesn't really fill in the gap that property
Not the
taxes do.
amount
So
that you-
it would allow you to maybe cut people's property taxes by $200 a year or $300 a year, but it's not going to make a major difference. And I think in Austin there's going to be huge resistance to any sales tax. Republican side increasing taxes, Democratic side because they're regressive taxes.
Which is a great lead in into my rapid fire questions of yes or no. Okay. Will marijuana be decriminalized? Yes or no?
Eventually, yes. Maybe not this session.
Yeah,
Okay.
I can't do a yes or no on that one. I think I can say it's not going to be legalized.
Okay.
Decriminalized, I don't think so because I don't think Lieutenant Governor Patrick is there yet. I think there's enough support for it in the House for it to pass, but I don't think there's support in the Senate.
So much for yes or no.
Leaving
Will
revenue on
Medicare
the table, by the way.
Okay. Will Medicare be expanded?
No.
No.
Okay. Will Texas pass the school safety bill?
Yes.
Yes.
Will Texas voters swap high sales tax for property tax?
No.
No.
Okay. Will Texas increase home health care providers' base pay?
No.
Okay.
Yes, but not really. So
Not after inflation?
Yeah, not after inflation. So I would say yes, but it'll be so minimal that no one will feel it.
Sonny mentioned the school safety plan. What is the school safety plan we anticipate coming out of this session?
More money for schools to add metal detectors, hire security personnel, and harden the school, whatever that means in terms of doors, cameras, and the like. But it's more, I think it's going to be more figurative, and many schools are already doing that, so it'll just be refunding them for things that they already are doing. But the costs are huge, and that's going to be eating in to, because even if the monies are provided, what's likely to be provided are one-time costs. So to buy metal detectors, to buy cameras, to harden doors, to close things, it's going to be tough to have recurring funds to staff those metal detectors,
still
to
have to
staff
pay
the
for that.
security
Yeah, the
officers.
sustainability.
Right.
Yeah.
And Senator Larry Taylor of Friendswood, who represents, by the way, Santa Fe ISD,
Right.
has filed a bill that would look at increasing mental health services for schools, as well as doing what's called a threat assessment, to be able to look at where there may be potential problems, either from a facility standpoint or evaluating students who may potentially be at risk.
Is that all the answers you think we need for school safety?
Well, you know, you bring up, Murray, you bring up
Guns are,
mental-
of course, the elephant in the room.
Well,
no one
that
wants to
is
talk
the
about.
The
elephant
people don't have
right.
the good people don't
Well,
have the guns, right?
The other part is mental health. The fact that the governor said that mental health was going to be one of the top issues, and that they're talking about establishing a Texas mental health care consortium. Yeah. Where are we going with this, and what is the impact you think? Is it going to really pass?
I think it's going to. I mean, Jane Nelson is doing a good job
She is.
shepherding it, and I think she's gained enough support in the Senate where it's going to pass. I don't think the money is going to be what you would really need to do it on a full-throated basis and full force and really provide the resources that you would need to address the full problem. But it's going to get us at least partial way there.
Okay.
Well, in terms of mental health study, you know, we're building a new facility.
Right here.
I guess they broke ground or they're getting ready to. It was authorized in the last session of the legislature, which will bring needed long-term mental health beds to Harris County.
But what I've heard so much about, especially in Austin, is the need for a network of creating some kind of consortium that connects all the pieces, because the disconnect is that people don't know what other people are doing or where people are in the system. And so that would create that network.
And that's what Senator Nelson's bill
That's
does.
what she's pushing.
But it's, as Mark said, it's only $100 million, which in the grand
Yeah.
scheme of things isn't
Not
much.
very big.
No.
So,
It's a start. but
Yeah,
not a
it'll
finish.
lay the foundation. The real question is in the future,
Can we
does someone
fund it?
build on
How
that
do we
foundation?
sustain it and
Fund it
continue
at the
to
level
grow?
it needs, because there's a lot of mental illness.
Oh no,
out
it's,
there.
it's the needs are tremendous, and what really the people who get hurt are the people that are not indigent, but so the state would take over, but also are not extremely wealthy, so they can pay for it out of their pocket. That middle group, which ranges from lower middle class to upper middle class, can't afford a lot of it because we're talking $900 for an hour, or $600 for an hour, $500 for a day, things that wipe most people out.
And what we've seen, of course, is that what has become the de facto mental health treatment center for many people is the jail.
Yeah, that's
Right.
it.
And that's neither
That's
a good
that's a
That's
expenditure
not
for
a
taxpayers,
That's just
nor is
housing.
a proper way to deal
Well,
with
it also
a real
costs
problem.
a lot per day, but we're not getting what we need to help
Right,
these
it's
people.
just housing
Okay,
themselves.
biggest issue that Harris County faces, if I'd asked you today, if Harvey returned tomorrow, would the results be any different?
Well, at least money was allocated, at least partially today, so we have Some of the billions will be coming down to reimburse Harris County and the city of Houston and everyone for the expenses that have not already been covered. So we'll have that being done. But I would say if Harvey hits soon, very little has been done that would lead to a different outcome.
Well, I
than
will
we thought.
say I did notice that Braze Bayou, they're doing some work on it.
Yeah.
And
But Project
Above
Braze has
Meyerland-
been going on
Yeah,
forever.
maybe they
I
get
think
it
it was supposed to be
finished.
finished 10
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so but they weren't working on it before, so now they are.
Is
There's-
it realistic though that we'll get a statewide flood plan anytime soon?
It is one of one of the governor's emergency calls was for disaster preparedness, and there is one bill that creates that plan. I don't believe it's been passed yet.
No.
But I don't know what sort of, what form it will take ultimately if
The
it
Texas
does.
Senate, the proposal was $1.8 billion for relief and preparation, but it hadn't passed yet. Some of the concerns out of Austin were the comments that County Judge Hidalgo and Commissioner Rodney Ellis made, which talked about how we're going to allocate the money, and there was concern that now we're going to allocate money not based on the greatest good to reduce flooding and save our homes, our property, and the like, but now make sure we do it based on, I don't know what, I guess it is, rich and poor watersheds, whatever that
Well, it'd be
means.
social. It's having a social equity element. It was a mistake by Judge Hidalgo, and Rodney Ellis should know a little better, given that he was in the Senate, in that it immediately gets bristles going in the Republican majority in the legislature.
Minute time you mentioned
Yeah,
social.
well, you're mentioning equity, and you're mentioning that the funds may be used for social welfare purposes instead of flood purposes. Even if it's a relatively it would just be one element of a large number of variables
Right.
that determine the allocation of funding. Politically, it wasn't smart because it just raises their suspicion. And we always have to remember, counties in Texas only really have as much power as the state is willing to give them. The Constitution is a unitary constitution. Counties are not states. They are vassals of the government in Austin.
distributed.
And if government wants to tell the county you can't do something, you can't do it.
Yeah, I mean, doesn't it make sense, though, that if the projects we need to do are the ones that create the greatest good, the biggest bang for the buck? What you do to reduce overall flooding in the community or in the region, as opposed to worrying about one part of Houston or the other. I mean, it just seems ridiculous to me, and I think sets the county up for another disaster.
But the greater good also should include those elements. I think you're right. It doesn't. I think it got blown out of proportion by taking that one slice, but that's a slice of the pie. So
Yeah, and Harvey, as we know, did not discriminate by
No,
neighborhood.
it
It hit neighborhoods rich
Everywhere.
and poor.
Everywhere.
And ultimately, we want to see that everyone gets taken care of. That's a tall order. There are limited resources, but I think we want to go in that direction.
Of course,
trying to,
of course. If you and you all are keen observers, and it's not our subject this week, but if you look at some of the city permits being issued in the floodplain to build more
Oh,
multifamily
goodness
housing,
gracious.
you got like, is there anybody home who understands the
Are
problem?
people watching what's happening?
No, the biggest, for me, the sort of biggest
Is
slap in the
why.
face was, I think it's the Pinecrest Golf Course that's up on the north side, where right after Harvey, they're essentially allowing multifamily housing on essentially taking up every bit of grass on an area that could have been used for flood detention, and where you have the brick, I think it's the brick, it's not Brick Bayou, but essentially it's a run of a creek that runs,
Right.
water runs through there. So putting that there just means that you're going to have more flooding downstream
Right.
that wasn't there before.
and by the same token, the county allowing 20 years ago development behind the reservoir, which
Well,
there's
how
just
dumb was that?
Yeah.
Who came up with that idea? God knows.
At least Fort Bend County had the good sense to require on the plats that it say this is a detention zone. Harris County, the developers were so powerful they were able to
They
even
just
keep
plow
that off
all
there.
through.
Yeah, when Fort Bend, what happened when people were buying houses, they talked to their real estate agent, they probably were told, oh, don't worry about that. That doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But it really does. It's a big
Disregard.
deal. And I will say that we have another major flood event. The citizens are going to be in total revolt and angry that stuff is not getting done and not a priority.
it would devastate our city, I think.
We'd be
It
pretty
would.
much
economically.
we'd be underwater, right? To use that. Okay, one of the other issues that are up there that not talked about as much, but been brought up on the show before, is juvenile justice reform, and there's talk. Harold Dutton
Right. He's really pushing.
has
for that.
been a leader on the issue, a longtime representative from Houston, on raising the age to 19. And Harold's theory has been that children are not mature when they're 18. They're not necessarily mature when they come 19. But if they stay in the juvenile system does a much better job of rehabilitation than the adult system, which is essentially a warehouse. And we can give the opportunity for a lot of young people at age 18 to get their act together and not have a permanent criminal record, because it's so much easier in the juvenile system to clean up your record and get rid of it as opposed to the adult system. So, and what's happened, and it's interesting, this has been a battle between Harold Dutton and John Whitmire, because Whitmire had opposed it, and they've been working, I know they've been working, John, to get him to agree. I know there's some sense, I know that Senator Betancourt actually is supportive of raising the age. Do you think this is a good idea, and what are the prospects for passage?
Prospects for passage, you can loop back to your first statement. What is John Whitmire's position? John Whitmire is strongly against a criminal justice type topic. It's not going anywhere in the Senate, particularly one that's not going to have full Republican support like this one. So I think in the end, to ask if it's going to pass, you have to go back to John Whitmire. He is the dean and one of the most influential members of the Senate. Is it a good thing? I think there's some positives to it, certainly, in terms of rehabilitation and helping people, essentially not sending people down a path of which there's no real return. And there are also some good fiscal responses. But I'm not the expert. Senator Whitmire is, so he's the one that Harold Dutton needs to convince.
Well, how about the politics of this, Keir?
I think it's tricky, right? I think for many crimes, there would probably be a lot of public support for policies. For certain other crimes, heinous, violent crimes, maybe not so much. But I think, there probably are some merits to considering this in at least some form. My sense is maybe, like many things in the legislature, if it doesn't happen this session, you can rework things and try, maybe 2 sessions down the road, you can get something through. That's often what we see happens.
As we talk about all the different things that are on the floor right now as far as bills and everything, when you consider the House is abiding by this rule called, what is it called? Put and take. You put something on the table, you take something off. How is anything going to get resolved if we're operating under that rule?
Well, I think that largely pertains to amendments related to the budget, which is under consideration right now. And my understanding, it's designed to sort of,
Balance it out.
well, not balance it out, and also just to keep nonsense from being, introduced in terms of amendments that you've got to show if you're going to bring something forward that how you're going to pay for it.
Yeah, not turn it into a Christmas tree where you're just putting new
Hanging
pieces
stuff all over the place.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, how about this question? Is there going to be a special session?
Senator Patrick's broached it. I mean, that's a negotiating position in that some people will want to avoid a special session, particularly the governor. The special sessions are always tough for a governor because the governor calls the special session and has to determine the issues on it. And there always are a lot of groups out there that want their pet issues on it, and the governor has to say no to many of them. So from Governor Abbott's perspective, the ideal is to get this resolved right now. And I think for Texas Republicans, they want to get it resolved right now. The last thing they need is internal infighting when they're looking at an election in 2020 where they're under some threat for the first time. I don't think they're going to lose the Texas House, but they could.
Yeah, I mean, I think it remains to be seen. Obviously, if there are issues in resolving the budget, you have maybe some potential there. School finance, again, I think it's a much heavier lift to actually get something done than has been portrayed by leadership, particularly at the beginning of this session. But whether the will exists to even try that over the summer, legislators hate coming back to the Capitol in the summer. But I think it could go either way.
In fact, you talked about school finance being the big number, and it's a huge number in the budget. How long have we been talking about getting rid of Robin Hood and replacing it with a new system? A decade? More than a decade?
Ever since
More than a
Edgewood,
decade.
effectively, ever since
More.
Edgewood. And the difficulty with Robin Hood is that until you have the final details, it's really tough for individual representatives and senators to know how their ISDs are going to be impacted. And so you have lots of moving parts, and every time you move one of them, you change everything.
All right, I guess while we're talking about the state, there was a story out last week that the state education agency is still looking at taking over HISD. So they told them not to hire a new superintendent. So is it the prospects here that we're going to have a state-run school district in Houston?
That's hard to say. The governor seems to not think much of the notion of local control in general. So his move to intervene in the workings of HISD, I mean, some of the dysfunction among the board members is well known. But it was curious. Things that seemed to have quieted down for a while, and then this sort of sudden halt to the finals of the superintendent search was curious.
It just makes sense not to put somebody in place if you're going to take them out. So
No, that's true.
Yeah.
Is the school district too big?
I think it is. I mean, HISD is a hot mess. And one of the I mean, both
You
the
want to be superintendent?
No, I mean that's the problem. After
no.
Superintendent Saavedra, I mean, he essentially said this place is a mess. I'm going to go to a place where the mayor names me, the mayor backs me up in
Right.
New York, and I can actually get things done. Not where I have to deal with this dysfunctional crew where they fight among themselves, they conspire against themselves, and they're more interested in promoting their own personal interests than actually resolving the interests of students. That's not everybody on the HISD board, but it's a majority.
Well, Mark gets the final word. Thank you, Mark Jones. Thank you, Keir Murray. Thank you, Sonny Messiah-Jiles.
Yes,
We'll have you
good night.
back, dear. Join us next week for another episode of Red, White, and Blue.